Jetzt gehen wir erstmal rein. How one game explains the NBA offense explosion. Wir fragen uns ja alle, warum es in letzter Zeit so krass ist mit dem Scoring in der NBA, Digga, dass immer mehr Leute 70-Punkte-Spiele in der Season treffen oder 40-Punkte-Spiele haben in der Season. Anscheinend hat Thick in Basketball da den passenden Denkanstoß.
Batum for three. And Sacramento wins in double overtime. 176 to 175.
176 to 175? That is the second highest scoring game in NBA history, trailing only the legendary 186-184 tilt between Denver and Detroit 40 years ago.
Die hatten aber auch eine Overtime, ja.
Although that game needed 3 overtimes and this one only needed 2. The Kings and Clippers averaged 6 points per minute across 58 scintillating minutes, throwing haymakers back and forth at each other all night, and it left me thinking about a question I get every day. Is this good offense, or is it just bad defense?
Eine gute Frage.
Before we break down this historic game, let's put into perspective how rare it is for teams to score like this. Between 1992 and 2019, there were more than 32,000 NBA games played, and not one saw both teams score at 3 points per minute. 3 points per minute comes out to 144 points in a regulation game, and there were 7 such Nuggets games in the 80s and 90s because they played this wild, wide-open style with some comically bad defense. If you're casually watching at home, this crazy sequence with 3 straight threes in 17 seconds might have a similar glorified pickup feel to it, but look more closely and there's a ton happening. Mason Plumlee tries to save a rebound, which gives the Kings a 5-on-4. Kawhi Leonard tells a teammate to pick up the ball so he and Russell Westbrook can guard these 2 shooters, but Kawhi doesn't want to close out hard because the 5th King can run in for a layup, so it's better to concede the 3 to Keegan Murray. But now the Kings have to match up because De'Aaron Fox is on the other side of the court, so he calls for someone to guard Westbrook, and even though Sacramento's back, there are only 2 defenders on the near side of the floor, because in the first second of the shot clock, Murray was slow to recognize a switch on a player who was still in the backcourt. So a second defender has to slide over and help. That leaves Kawhi open in the corner, and he drains a 3. Of course, the Kings push it right back up the floor themselves, and with a small cushion, Fox fires a triple, and that's 9 points in 17 seconds.
Whew.
I'm going fast again!
In today's NBA, elite offenses exploit the smallest advantages. The Clippers create a ton of space for Plumlee to roll. Kevin Huerter's ready to help in the paint, but he goes to reset his 3-second count, and at the exact same time, Plumlee slips the pick, and Westbrook finds him with a beautiful dime. So the Kings come right.
Es sind halt wirklich Sekunden, die das Ganze entscheiden. Ne? Wäre jetzt Kevin Huerter eine Sekunde lang nicht rausgegangen, hätte er viel bessere Defense und Plumlee spielen können. Und das ganze Play hätte nochmal anders ausgesehen. Aber selbst er hatte ja nochmal die Chance, hier rauszupassen.
Finds him with a beautiful dime. So the Kings come right back off the make, are in the front court in 2 seconds, and find Huerter trailing the play. Domantas Sabonis wisely screens Kawhi, so it's a wide open look. And how did Huerter get so open, you ask?
Kevin Huerter auch ein böser Typ.
He left Marcus Morris Sr. to go help in the paint, so Morris stayed with Kawhi's man coming up the floor. Kawhi doesn't quite get the message that he needs to sprint across the court, and that's all it takes for a 5-second offense.
Bruder, es sind diese Kleinigkeiten, aber ohne Spaß, so sieht das teilweise auch in 2K aus, Digga. Also halbe Sekunde irgendwen vergessen, Bruder, oder nicht direkt den Typen picked up, als halt der Offense-Defense-Switch war und direkt reingeschissen.
We talked about this brilliant Kings attack at the beginning of the season, and this is a bread and butter action with Huerter lurking under the basket, then darting out in any direction. So Paul George calls for a switch, Harrison Barnes realizes it's a switch, so he screens his own man as a counter. Herter up fakes and sidesteps into some vintage red velvet. Here's a similar set from the '88 finals where the Lakers just switched the back screen for Isaiah Thomas. The screener is open but inside the three-point line, and when Isaiah relocates like Herter, he's also inside the line, making a closeout easier, and it takes a brilliant pass to get a good shot. In today's game, complexity is typical. Plumlee comes up to set a pick, but he actually veers off to screen for the wing, who curls around and flings up a lob for a dunk. And that dunk is open because at the start of the play, Nick Batum cleared out to the corner, leaving the paint completely open. And once Murray lingers too long near this corner screen, there's no one to help over at the basket. On a play like that, defenses are worried about that little exit screen to free up a shooter like this. So when the Kings run this play in the third, the Clippers just switch it to take away the advantage, but Fox attacks himself the other way, and when help comes, now there's only one defender to cover two passes. And so once Kawhi glued himself to the shooter, the Clippers were at the mercy of Fox's decision-making, and it's a dunk. Defending these actions is a nightmare because when one option is taken away, it simply opens up a new counter, and I'm not sure how teams are supposed to slow this down. Having a center who can grab and go in transition strains defenses. George needs to get across the floor to his man, gambles for a steal, and that springs Malik Monk, who gets it back to Domas, who up fakes George into the ether with one hand like he's Michael Jordan. In the old days, most centers couldn't even really dribble, and if they tried to in the open court, it didn't always end well. Today's league is full of big men who can grab a board and take it coast to coast, and these players are skilled enough to lead the break and play make too. Sabonis gives the Kings that extra dimension, spinning and twirling into passes, and he's not a great shooter, but he can attack space from the outside, and that's really hard to defend in isolation. The Kings will also play the 6'9" Trey Lyles as a backup, and he makes 38% of his wide open threes. Compare that to the mid-2000s, where neither of the big men screening for LeBron here were shooting threats, so the Pistons only have to worry about the roll man, and Cleveland has to fall back on the brilliance of James to finish in traffic because the other big isn't a threat to shoot either. In 2023, nearly 2/3 of the league shoots 37% or better on wide open threes, including a ton of powerful 7-footers. And the Clippers are one of many teams that will downsize at center to get more shooting on the court. Nick Batum has made 45% of his open triples in the...
Bruder, was sind denn das für Zahlen, Alter? Damals war, oder was heißt damals? Letztes Jahr waren noch 40% bei 3 oder bei einem Dreier halt übelst gut, Digga. Jetzt ist überall 43, 42, 45. Das ist halt wirklich sehr, sehr
last 3 seasons. And according to basketball...
Du kannst eigentlich schon rechnen, jeder zweite Shot, den er bei einem Dreier nimmt, Digga, der geht rein. Und dann muss er auch nochmal rechnen, ne? Manchmal hat er gute Tage, wo er dann jeden Dreier trifft und dafür manchmal dann schlechte Tage, wo er dann jeden Dreier verfehlt, so gefühlt.
For its estimates, he's logged 600 minutes as a small ball center this year, where he can play make like this too. That was one of 26 threes for the Clippers, the 4th highest total in a game in NBA history, and LA nearly shot the lights out by drilling 58% of these, the highest percentage ever for a team with 45 attempts or more. All that shooting creates a ton of space, so a non-shooter can stand outside, 3 off-ball players pull the defense out of the lane, and that leaves Fox on an island against a bigger guard, and it's an and one. Here's a small ball set in the 4th quarter, and because George is so skilled, the Kings stick a guard on him, which means when they switch the pick and roll, a big man is pulled out to George, who can then attack him without any other bigs waiting in the paint. Compare that to 20 years ago, where Kobe Bryant curls into the lane only to meet a wall of defenders because his 3 other teammates are all within about 10 feet of him, and there are no good reset options, so he resorts to a long isolation jumper. Today's NBA is like first-class spacing
Ja, ohne Spaß, Digga. Also ich finde das schon so ein krasser Unterschied zu damals.
compared to the coach of yesteryear, where players have Grand Canyon-sized lanes to drive into without resistance. And this is a small lineup to boot, so Batum offers little rim protection, whereas teams used to have multiple shot blockers on the floor. And because Robert Horry is inside the three-point stripe, Ben Wallace is just 2 steps away from an amazing save at the rim. But today's big man can't just hang out in the paint, and they have to cover way more ground, stretching out to the line, effectively removing a shot blocker from the basket area. As Mike Prada says in the great book Spaced Out, the court has effectively doubled in size because of all this shooting. So on a play like this, the centers start in the corner, Sabonis has to chase Batum around a screen, Fox recognizes he needs help, Sabonis slams on the brakes to switch back to Westbrook, but by then it's too late and the point guard is left to protect the cup. On this one, Herter's out on an island but actually stops Kawhi. The Kings are in really good position, so they repost Leonard. Help comes early from the baseline, but Kawhi throws an insane 30-foot skip pass into the corner, and all it takes is Fox recovering
Kawhi ist auch so ein
at the wrong angle to free up the deadly George. The Kings made 18 threes themselves in this one, led by Malik Monk's half dozen off the bench. Monk led the Beam team in scoring, with 32 of his 45 coming after halftime, and this is simply too much room to give a shooter in today's league. Back in the 80s, this kind of cushion was normal because most players didn't take pull-up threes. That was a dunk because of a miscommunication chasing a sharp shooter around a screen. And we saw the exact same gravitational force in this game, with newcomer Eric Gordon worried about Herter's shooting, so he forgets to switch the screen, and there's no one left to help. Gordon had a really rough night defensively, so there definitely was some soft defense in this game, even by today's standards. He had a hard time staying with Monk, and these kinds of breakdowns are really hard to cover up with the paint so open. The Kings also had their way with Marcus Morris Sr., who is supposed.
Wir waren schon in 2K-Icon. Ne? Heute waren wir schon in, ich glaube so 14 Uhr. Ich glaube sogar 1:30 waren wir sogar schon in 2K. Ne? Eigentlich wollte ich jetzt noch auf Amnesia, Amnesia spielen, aber das bringt nichts, wenn das halt draußen immer noch hell ist. Ne? Macht keinen Sinn, Horrorspielern. Deswegen 19 Uhr ist halt leider heute schon Schluss, weil Phoenix Suns gegen Dallas Mavericks kommt. KD gegen Kyrie. Da bin ich auch mal sehr gespannt drauf.
Supposed to offer more mobility as a small ball big man, but his feet were in concrete against Monk and Fox. So yes, a little of this could be called bad defense. Fox just randomly jumps out of the way here, but then Westbrook still makes a pinpoint pass for the old-fashioned three-point play. Compare the shot quality you've seen in this game to before the three-point revolution, where teams were often looking for post-isolation shots, and in the 2000s, if they were running more pick and roll, it was often for a mediocre long two from a big. Offenses now create shots against complex defenses. Here's a spread pick and roll. The Kings perfectly execute a triple switch to contain everything, but Terrence Davis is a quarter step behind Batum, who turns into Steph Curry from the corner. That is nuts.
Yeah.
This possession is basically perfect defense, with the Clippers staying connected on every Kings cut, switching all the handoffs and screening actions on the outside, and they end up with the backup point guard isolating 30 feet away against the 6'9 George, and it doesn't even matter. Kawhi also made a ton of tough shots in this game, morphing into second three-peat MJ from the mid-range. I mean, this is good defense. It's just better offense. And since it's 2023, he can also make step-back threes as well. The claw was so hot by the third that the Kings started double-teaming him, and he just said, challenge accepted.
Legendary.
I mean, you tell me, is this bad defense? Murray's a step behind, chasing him off the screen, contests the jumper pretty well, and it's like a practice shot for Kawhi. They tried to trap him, but the floor is so spaced out, it's hard to cover with just 3 players, so Murray has to rotate 50 feet to the corner, and it's another Batum bomb. So even trapping superstars back in the day wasn't as costly because there were still multiple players in the tight confines of the paint. The Clippers hit 100 points in this one with 6:21 left in the third, a very good sign usually, and they had a 14-point lead with 4 minutes left until this wild sequence where the Kings came back with their defense and some sloppy play from the Clippers that led to 4 turnovers in just 40 seconds.
Das ist ja behindert.
On the ensuing possession, Fox took advantage of LA's small lineup because there aren't any
Bruder, die sind ja schon bei 150 Punkten, wenn die noch im 4. Viertel sind.
shot blockers in the paint. Finally, with the Kings trailing 153 to 150 in the waning seconds, they draw up a hammer screen on the weak side, but the Clippers switch it, so Norman Powell is sitting on the intended pass, only for Monk to relocate on the pass and splash a stone-cold dagger to force overtime. The first overtime was characterized by a bunch of back-and-forth tough shot-making from both teams. And the second overtime was more back-and-forth craziness that was sort of like everything we've discussed so far, just running on a cocktail of caffeine and adrenaline. In the second overtime, the Kings again found themselves down 6 before they attacked Gordon on an island for free throws. Then, after a stop, Monk hit Kawhi Leonard with this nasty cut back across the middle for a quick 3 to cut it to 1. The Clippers couldn't score, and so a contested 17-foot pull-up from Fox put the Kings in front for good, 176 to 175, before, ironically, a number of defensive stands from Sacramento held on for the win in the second highest scoring game in NBA history, and an incredible demonstration of just how much basketball has changed in the last few years. I could talk about this game for hours.
Digga, das war halt wirklich das perfekte Beispiel dafür, wie krass Basketball mittlerweile geworden ist. Vor allem das Scoring. Sehr, sehr wild, Bruder. Das ist halt alles gute Defense gespielt, aber so ein klein bisschen sloppy vielleicht. Das wird aber direkt erstmal ausgenutzt. Aber der Rest wurde ja gut Defense gespielt, aber einfach bessere Offense, Digga. Wenn da die Hand ist und die Shooting-Hand aber so geht, dann ist reingeschissen, weißt du, ich meine. Alter. Sehr, sehr geiles Video.